Hello, Sarah Sabin, Executive Leadership and Intuition Coach here. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about one of the keys to long-term sustained success and growth, and that is delayed gratification. So, no surprise to any of you for me to say that we live in an age where instant gratification is very much a thing. And the quicker that we get things and see the results, the better for how we feel, because we get this release of dopamine into our system. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter released by the brain, which is responsible for motivation, pleasure, and essentially reward. So the problem with instant gratification is we are trained to expect things as quickly as humanly possible, rather than realizing that we need to be in it for the long haul, for the long game, in order to achieve those really big goals that we set ourselves. Now, an example of this sort of quick dopamine hit release in the workplace is, for example, focusing on tasks that you can get done quickly. And that could be, for example, answering emails or doing kind of more administrative tasks that fit in with your day and factor on your to-do list, because you get that dopamine hit when you tick them off quickly, rather than thinking in terms of what is going to be the absolute best use of my time to get me towards my goals. So rather than thinking in terms more of the Pareto principle, which states that 20% of our efforts generate 80% of our results, but those may be bigger tasks where you'll have to wait a longer amount of time to see the outcome, reward, payback from those tasks. So, what do we do about it? We need to train our brain to get pleasure and reward from delayed gratification. So, dopamine is really important for motivation and this sense of progress. But you want to train that dopamine to come out, not just when you achieve the end result, but in the process, so on the journey. So in other words, you want to learn to fall in love with the process. You want to celebrate yourself for taking these little steps towards the outcome, towards the goal, rather than only getting on this dopamine release when you've actually hit the outcome. So in other words, you want it to be released more often. Another way of looking at it is this. So let's say you have a goal to make £20,000, right? Now, when you hit that £20,000 goal, you'll get a dopamine spike and you'll come down from it relatively quickly, most likely, and you'll already be on to the next thing. And if you don't hit the goal, high achieving people tend to beat themselves up with, which is a whole minefield. But in order to get to that £20,000 goal, there are going to be steps that you need to take in the process to increase your chances of generating that amount of money that you've set for yourself. And you want to be aware of what those steps are and literally celebrate the steps and train your mind to see how each step taken is getting you closer towards your goal. And then what you're doing is essentially training yourself to take pleasure in the process. The more pleasure and motivation you have for the process, the more likely you are to do it. And therefore, the higher the likelihood that you will achieve your outcome. So a goal could be money related, it could be promotion related, it could be changing job related, it could be getting your team on board related. Doesn't matter what the goal is, but it's about learning to fall in love with the process.